I need to share something with you that took me years to understand and cost me more than I care to admit. This is the story of how I learned the hard way about the hidden costs of supporting Thai bar girls, and why every man considering retirement or extended stays in Thailand needs to hear these 7 warning signs before they make the same mistakes I did. My name doesn't matter, but my experience does. I'm a 62-year-old retiree who thought I had found paradise in Thailand, complete with a beautiful young woman who seemed to genuinely care about me. What I actually found was an expensive education in manipulation, cultural exploitation, and the difference between transactional relationships and genuine love. Over the course of 18 months, I spent over 500,000 baht supporting someone who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM with emotional buttons she could push at will. Before I dive into the warning signs, let me paint you a picture of how I ended up in this situation. Like many Western men, I arrived in Thailand carrying the emotional baggage of a failed marriage, diminished confidence, and a deep longing for connection. My divorce had been finalized 2 years earlier after 28 years of marriage that had slowly deteriorated into roommate status. My ex-wife had made it clear that she found me boring, predictable, and increasingly irrelevant to her life. The settlement had been fair but painful, leaving me with enough money to retire comfortably, but feeling like a failure as a husband and a man. Thailand represented a fresh start, a chance to reinvent myself in a place where Western men were still valued and desired. The warm climate, low cost of living, and reputation for beautiful, caring women made it seem like the perfect escape from the cold reality of starting over in my 60s back home in Australia. I had read the forums, watched the YouTube videos, and absorbed all the expatriate wisdom about finding happiness in the land of smiles. What I hadn't prepared for was how vulnerable this mindset would make me to exploitation. I was emotionally hungry, financially comfortable, and culturally naive. I was exactly the type of target that experienced bar girls can spot from across a crowded room. I might as well have worn a sign that said, "Lonely retiree with money-seeking validation." The first warning sign that money becomes the relationship itself hit me within the first month, but I was too infatuated to recognize it. Ploy was her name, though I later learned that wasn't her real name either. She was 26, spoke decent English, and worked at a go-go bar in Pattaya. When we first met, she was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my stories about life back in Australia. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in years since my divorce, I felt truly connected to someone. She had this way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the most fascinating person in the room. She would laugh at my jokes, ask thoughtful questions about my past, and share what seemed like intimate details about her own life and dreams. She told me about growing up in a small village in Isan, about her family's struggles with poverty, about her dreams of opening a small restaurant someday. Her English was good enough for deep conversations, but she would occasionally struggle with a word or phrase in a way that seemed endearing rather than frustrating. But within weeks, every conversation somehow circled back to money. It started subtly, woven into the fabric of our getting-to-know-you discussions. She would mention her sick mother in Isan who needed medicine, but it came up naturally when I asked about her family. Her younger brother was struggling in school and needed money for books, but she only mentioned it when explaining why she seemed worried about something. The water buffalo had died, and the family needed a new one to work their small farm, but this was presented as background information about why she couldn't visit home as often as she wanted. Each story was delivered with tears in her eyes and genuine seeming distress. She wasn't asking for money directly, just sharing her concerns and worries the way any caring daughter and sister would. As a decent human being, how could I not help? 50,000 baht here, 20,000 there. It seemed like small amounts to someone with a comfortable retirement fund, and the gratitude and affection I received in return made me feel like a hero, a provider, a man who could make a real difference in someone's life. What I didn't realize was that I was being systematically conditioned through a sophisticated process that had been refined through years of practice. Every time I gave her money, she would shower me with affection, gratitude, and physical intimacy. She would tell me how different I was from other customers, how kind and generous and understanding. She would cook my favorite meals, give me long massages, and make me feel like the center of her universe. The connection between my financial generosity and her emotional and physical availability was never stated explicitly, but it was reinforced constantly through perfectly timed rewards. When I hesitated or suggested we spend time together without any financial exchange, she would become distant, sad, or suddenly have urgent family emergencies that required her immediate attention and my immediate financial assistance. She never demanded money directly or made explicit threats. Instead, she would become withdrawn and melancholy, explaining that she was worried about her family and felt terrible that she couldn't help them. She would apologize for being poor, for being a burden, for not being the kind of woman who could contribute financially to our relationship. The pattern was so gradual and so expertly executed that I genuinely believed I was in a loving relationship where I was simply helping my girlfriend through temporary hardships. She had convinced me that her financial needs were external to our relationship, unfortunate circumstances that were preventing her from being the carefree, happy woman she naturally was. I saw myself as her knight in shining armor, rescuing her from poverty and family obligations so we could focus on building a life together. The second warning sign was how these financial requests created unbreakable patterns that became increasingly difficult to escape. What started as occasional emergency assistance became a monthly expectation, then a weekly one, and eventually a daily reality. The amounts also increased gradually, so gradually that I didn't notice the escalation until I looked back at my bank statements months later. Ploy stopped working at the bar after about 6 weeks, telling me she wanted to focus on our relationship. This seemed like a positive development at first. I was supporting her anyway, so why not make it official and help her transition to a better life? She spoke passionately about her dreams of learning to cook Western food, improving her English, maybe taking some computer classes to develop office skills. She wanted to become the kind of woman who could be a real partner to a Western man, not just entertainment for tourists. But without the structure of her job, her financial needs actually increased rather than decreased. She needed money for rent on her own apartment because she said it wasn't appropriate for her to move in with me so quickly. She needed money for food, clothes, cosmetics, phone bills, and transportation. She needed money to visit her family, to help her friends, to invest in small business opportunities that never seemed to materialize. Every day brought a new financial request, and every request was presented as either an emergency or an investment in our future together. The requests became more sophisticated over time. Instead of just asking for money for her mother's medicine, she would show me pictures of the prescription bottles and hospital bills. Instead of just mentioning her brother's school fees, she would show me official-looking documents in Thai that I couldn't read. But that seemed legitimate. She started bringing friends around who would confirm her stories and add their own tales of financial hardship, creating a social environment where constant money problems seemed normal and expected. I found myself trapped in a cycle where saying no to any request would result in arguments, tears, accusations that I didn't really love her, or threats that she would have to go back to working in the bar to support herself. The emotional manipulation was so expertly crafted that I genuinely felt guilty for even questioning these requests. After all, what was 20,000 baht to me compared to her desperate need to help her family or secure our future together? She had a way of making every financial request seem like a test of my character and commitment. If I truly loved her, I would want to help her family. If I truly understood Thai culture, I would know that taking care of parents and siblings was not optional but a sacred duty. If I truly wanted a future with her, I would invest in her education and development rather than expecting her to remain dependent on bar work forever. The third warning sign was how the money masked the reality of what our relationship actually was. When you're financially supporting someone, it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish between genuine affection and transactional behavior. Every smile, every kiss, every intimate moment becomes tainted by the question of whether this person would be here if the money stopped flowing. But the money creates a buffer that prevents you from ever finding out the truth. Ploy would tell me she loved me every day, often multiple times throughout our conversations. She would cook for me, massage my shoulders after a long day, and seem genuinely happy to see me when I came home. She would remember small details about my preferences, surprise me with little gifts, and create an atmosphere of domestic bliss that felt incredibly real and satisfying. But these behaviors were always preceded or followed by financial requests, creating a pattern that I didn't recognize at the time, but that was as predictable as clockwork. She loved me, but she needed money for her mother's medicine. She was happy to see me, but there was an urgent situation with her brother's school fees. She wanted to spend the evening together, but first could I help her friend who was in trouble with loan sharks? The timing was never quite coincidental enough to be obvious, but it was consistent enough to create a subconscious association between my financial generosity and her emotional availability. The financial support created an artificial intimacy that felt real in the moment, but was actually just a very expensive performance. I was paying for the girlfriend experience, but I had convinced myself and been convinced by her that it was genuine love. The money allowed both of us to maintain this illusion because it removed the natural tests that real relationships face. We never had to navigate financial stress together, never had to make sacrifices for each other, never had to prove our commitment through anything other than my ability to keep paying. Looking back, I realized that we never had a single conversation about our future that didn't involve my money. She would talk about our dreams of opening a restaurant together, but the focus was always on how much capital I would need to provide. She would mention wanting to have children someday, but in the context of how expensive it would be to raise them properly. She would express interest in travelling together, but only to places that would require significant financial investment from me. The fourth warning sign was the gradual realization that I had simply become another customer, just a more expensive and exclusive one. This understanding came slowly and painfully over many months. I started noticing small inconsistencies in her stories, little details that didn't quite add up when I compared what she had told me at different times. The sick mother who needed expensive medicine was apparently well enough to take care of the water buffalo that had supposedly died months earlier. The brother who needed school fees was somehow also working full-time to support the family. The friend who was in trouble with loan sharks seemed to have the same crisis every few weeks, always requiring exactly the same amount of money to resolve. The small business opportunities that needed my investment would appear and disappear without explanation, replaced by new opportunities that sounded remarkably similar. I began to understand that the skills Ploy had developed working in bars were not just about entertaining customers for a few hours. They were comprehensive relationship management skills designed to extract maximum financial benefit from foreign men while providing just enough emotional and physical intimacy to keep the money flowing. The crying was practiced, triggered by specific situations, and calibrated to produce maximum emotional impact. The stories were recycled, refined through repetition with different customers, until they achieved perfect believability. The gratitude was performed with the skill of a professional actress. The love was a product I was purchasing, not an emotion I was receiving. But the most painful realization was that I wasn't even her only customer. Despite the fact that I was supporting her completely, she was still maintaining relationships with other foreign men through social media and messaging apps. She would disappear for hours, or sometimes entire days, claiming to be visiting family or dealing with emergencies. Her phone would be constantly buzzing with messages that she would quickly hide when I was around. She would receive calls that she would take in another room, speaking in rapid Thai that I couldn't understand. I later discovered, through a mutual acquaintance, that she was cultivating backup relationships and additional sources of income, while telling each man that he was special and unique. She had different names for different relationships, different stories about her background and circumstances, different dreams and goals depending on what each customer wanted to hear. I was not her boyfriend or even her primary source of income. I was simply one of several foreign men she was managing simultaneously, each believing he was in an exclusive relationship with a woman who truly cared about him. The fifth warning sign was how I became an emotional hostage in the relationship. The financial support created a web of guilt, obligation, and manufactured urgency that made it nearly impossible to step back and evaluate the situation objectively. Every time I tried to reduce the financial support or ask for more accountability, Ploy would escalate the emotional manipulation to levels that felt genuinely dangerous. She would cry uncontrollably and tell me that her family was depending on my support and would suffer terribly if I abandoned them. She would show me pictures of her elderly parents and young siblings, explaining in detail how my money was keeping them fed, housed, and healthy. She would accuse me of being selfish and uncaring, of not understanding Thai culture or the importance of family obligations. She would compare me unfavourably to Thai men who would never abandon their responsibilities to their partner's family. But the most effective manipulation was her threats of self-harm. She would threaten to kill herself if I left her, claiming that she had given up everything for our relationship and had no way to survive without me. She would say that she had burned bridges with her family by choosing a foreign boyfriend, that her friends had abandoned her for leaving the bar scene, that she had no skills or opportunities outside of our relationship. These threats always came with just enough specificity and apparent sincerity to terrify me into compliance. She would describe exactly how she would kill herself, where she would do it, and what note she would leave, explaining that her foreign boyfriend had abandoned her when she needed him most. She would show me the pills she had saved up or the high balcony she had identified. She would make me promise that if anything happened to her, I would take care of her family because they would have no other source of support. The psychological pressure was enormous and constant. The manufactured crises became more frequent and more severe as time went on. Her mother wasn't just sick anymore, she was dying and needed immediate surgery that would cost 200,000 baht. Her brother wasn't just struggling in school, he was being threatened by loan sharks who would hurt the entire family if the debt wasn't paid immediately. Her friend wasn't just having financial problems, she was being forced into prostitution, and only my money could save her from a life of degradation and abuse. Each crisis was presented as a test of my love and commitment. If I truly cared about Ploy and her family, I would find a way to help regardless of the cost. If I hesitated or asked too many questions, it proved that I was just another selfish foreigner who didn't really understand or appreciate Thai people. The emotional manipulation was so sophisticated that I found myself apologizing for being suspicious and working harder to prove my love through increasingly large financial contributions. The sixth warning sign was the completely unequal perception of sacrifice in our relationship. From Ploy's perspective, which she articulated frequently and passionately, she was sacrificing everything for our relationship. She had given up her job, her independence, and her freedom to be with me. She was dealing with the judgment of her family and friends who disapproved of her relationship with an older foreign man. She was learning to cook Western food, trying to improve her English, and adapting to my preferences and lifestyle. She would often become emotional when discussing these sacrifices, explaining how difficult it was for a young Thai woman to be with an older foreign man. She faced discrimination from other Thais who assumed she was only with me for money. She had to endure the embarrassment of being seen as a prostitute or gold digger by people who didn't understand our relationship. She was giving up the possibility of marrying a Thai man and having a traditional Thai family in order to build a life with me. But from my perspective, I was the one making all the real sacrifices. I was providing all the financial support while receiving very little in return, beyond companionship and physical intimacy that felt increasingly transactional. I was adapting to her schedule, her moods, her family obligations, and her constant financial crises. I was giving up my retirement savings and my financial security for someone who seemed to view my contributions as the minimum expected payment for her presence in my life. I was also sacrificing my social connections and independence. Ploy demanded more and more of my time and attention, becoming jealous and suspicious when I wanted to spend time with other expatriate friends or pursue independent interests. She would create crises or emergencies that required my immediate attention whenever I had plans that didn't include her. She gradually isolated me from other relationships and activities until she became the center of my entire world. This disconnect in perception created constant tension and resentment on both sides. Ploy genuinely seemed to believe that she was giving me far more than she was receiving, while I felt like I was being taken advantage of by someone who saw me only as a source of money. Neither of us could understand the other's perspective, because we were operating from completely different frameworks of what the relationship was supposed to be. She saw herself as providing companionship, affection, and domestic services to a lonely older man who was lucky to have found someone young and beautiful, willing to be with him. From her perspective, the financial support was simply the natural and expected contribution from the male partner in any relationship. Thai men were expected to support their girlfriends and wives financially, so why should foreign men be any different? I saw myself as being generous and loving towards someone who was taking advantage of my feelings and my financial resources. From my perspective, genuine love should not require constant financial proof, and a real partner should contribute to the relationship in ways beyond just being present and attractive. The seventh and final warning sign was that the heartbreak, when it inevitably came, was delayed but devastating. For months, I had been suppressing my doubts, ignoring red flags, and convincing myself that our relationship was genuine despite all evidence to the contrary. The financial investment made it feel impossible to walk away. I had already spent so much money that leaving would mean admitting it was all wasted. The sunk cost fallacy kept me trapped long after I should have recognized the truth. Every time I considered ending the relationship, I would think about all the money I had already invested and convince myself that I just needed to be patient a little longer. Surely things would improve once her family's financial situation stabilized. Surely she would become less demanding once she felt more secure in our relationship. Surely the constant crises were just temporary bad luck that would eventually pass. I also convinced myself that ending the relationship would be cruel and heartless. She had become dependent on my support, and withdrawing it suddenly would cause real hardship for her and her family. I felt responsible for her well-being and guilty about the possibility of abandoning someone who had trusted me and built her life around our relationship. The emotional manipulation had been so effective that I genuinely believed leaving would make me a terrible person. When the relationship finally ended, it wasn't because I finally saw through the manipulation or found the courage to walk away. It was because Ploy found a wealthier target and simply disappeared one day with no explanation. I came home to an empty apartment and discovered that she had taken not only her belongings, but also several expensive items I had bought for our shared life together. The television, the jewelry I had given her, the laptop I had purchased for her education, even some of my own clothes and personal items were gone. Her phone was disconnected, her social media accounts were deactivated, and none of her friends claimed to know where she had gone. The few people who would talk to me suggested that she had left Pattaya entirely, possibly with a new foreign boyfriend who had more money than I did. One person mentioned seeing her with an older German man who owned several businesses in Thailand and was known for spending lavishly on young women. The emotional devastation was compounded by the financial reality. I had spent over 500,000 baht in 18 months, depleting a significant portion of my retirement savings for a relationship that had been entirely fictional from her perspective. But worse than the money was the realization that I had been living in a fantasy for a year and a half, believing in love that existed only in my imagination and her performance. I felt incredibly foolish and angry, not just at Ploy, but at myself for being so easily manipulated. I had ignored obvious warning signs, dismissed the advice of other expatriate friends who had tried to warn me, and convinced myself that my situation was different from all the other similar stories I had heard. I had believed that my money could buy genuine affection and that my generosity would be rewarded with loyalty and love. The recovery process began with the painful work of acknowledging how thoroughly I had been manipulated and how willingly I had participated in my own deception. This wasn't just about being scammed by a clever woman. It was about my own desperate need for companionship and validation that made me vulnerable to exploitation. It was about my cultural arrogance in assuming that my money could buy genuine affection from someone whose life circumstances were so different from my own. I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that I had been seeking a transactional relationship while pretending it was based on love. I wanted a young, beautiful woman to take care of me and make me feel desired and important. I was willing to pay for this experience, but needed to believe it was authentic to maintain my self-respect. Ploy was simply giving me what I was actually asking for while allowing me to maintain the illusion that it was something else. The first step in recovery was accepting responsibility for my own choices and motivations. Yes, I had been manipulated and taken advantage of, but I had also chosen to ignore obvious warning signs because the fantasy was more appealing than reality. I had chosen to believe stories that didn't make sense because questioning them would have forced me to acknowledge what the relationship really was. I spent months in therapy, both with a counsellor in Thailand and through online sessions with a therapist back in Australia. The process of unpacking my motivations, examining my patterns of behaviour, and developing healthier approaches to relationships was difficult but essential. I had to learn to distinguish between loneliness and love, between generosity and desperation, between helping someone and enabling their exploitation of me. The second step was understanding the broader context of these relationships within Thai culture and the economic realities that drive them. Bar girls and the women who engage in relationships with foreign men are not evil predators. They are often women from poor rural families who have limited economic opportunities and are using the resources available to them to survive and support their families. The skills they develop are survival skills, not character flaws. This doesn't excuse the manipulation and deception, but it helps me understand that I was not a victim of personal malice, but rather a participant in a well-established economic system that I had entered naively. My money was not buying love, it was buying a service. The problem was not that I was paying for companionship, but that I was lying to myself about what I was purchasing. Understanding this context helped me move past the anger and resentment that had been consuming me. Ploy was not a monster who had set out to destroy my life. She was a young woman from a poor family who had learned to use her youth and beauty to extract money from older foreign men who were seeking companionship and validation. She was good at her job, and I was an easy target who had walked willingly into a situation I didn't understand. The third step was developing realistic expectations for future relationships in Thailand. Genuine romantic relationships between older Western men and younger Thai women are certainly possible, but they require different approaches and different foundations than the bar scene provides. They require mutual respect, shared interests, compatible life goals, and the ability to communicate honestly about expectations and boundaries. Building authentic relationships in Thailand means looking beyond the obvious venues where transactional relationships are the norm. It means developing language skills, cultural understanding, and social connections that go beyond the expatriate bubble. It means being honest about your own motivations and realistic about what you can offer beyond financial support. I began studying Thai language seriously, not just the basic phrases that most expatriates learn, but the grammar and vocabulary needed for real communication. I started volunteering with local charities and community organizations, developing relationships with Thai people in contexts that had nothing to do with money or romance. I joined hiking groups, photography clubs, and cooking classes where I could meet people who shared my interests rather than my bank account. The most important lesson I learned was that money cannot create genuine intimacy, but it can very effectively prevent it. When financial support becomes central to a relationship, it corrupts every interaction and makes authentic connection nearly impossible. The person receiving support can never be sure their feelings are genuine rather than influenced by financial dependence. The person providing support can never be sure they are loved for themselves rather than for their money. This lesson extends beyond romantic relationships to friendships and social connections as well. I had to learn to be generous without being a pushover, helpful without being exploited, and open to new relationships without being naive about people's motivations. It's a delicate balance that requires constant attention and self-awareness. For men considering retirement in Thailand, or those already living there who are tempted by relationships with bar girls, my advice is simple but difficult to follow. If you want companionship that you pay for directly and honestly, that's a personal choice that can be made safely and ethically with proper precautions. There's nothing inherently wrong with transactional relationships, as long as both parties understand and accept what they're getting into. But don't convince yourself that paying for companionship is the same as finding love, and don't allow anyone else to convince you of that either. The moment you start believing that the woman you're supporting financially is with you for reasons beyond money, you're setting yourself up for the kind of expensive and devastating heartbreak that I experienced. If you want genuine romantic relationships, invest in yourself and your ability to connect with people as equals, rather than as a source of financial support. Learn the language, understand the culture, develop interests and social connections that attract people who share your values and goals. Be prepared to offer emotional support, companionship, and partnership rather than just money. This means being patient, being selective, and being honest about your own motivations and limitations. It means accepting that genuine relationships take time to develop and cannot be purchased or accelerated through financial generosity. It means being willing to be rejected, to face loneliness, and to do the hard work of personal growth rather than taking the easy path of buying companionship. The 500,000 baht I spent was expensive tuition for lessons I should have learned before I ever set foot in a go-go bar. But if sharing this story prevents even one other man from making the same mistakes, then perhaps some good can come from my expensive education in the hidden costs of supporting Thai bar girls. Remember that authentic relationships require mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and genuine care for each other's well-being beyond financial considerations. If money is the foundation of your relationship, then you don't have a relationship at all. You have a business arrangement that's being disguised as love, and that deception will ultimately cost you far more than money. It will cost you your ability to trust, your confidence in your own judgment, and potentially your financial security in retirement. Thailand can be a wonderful place to build a new life, but that life should be built on genuine connections and realistic expectations, not on the fantasy that your money can buy you. The love and respect that can only be earned through authentic human connection. Take the time to understand yourself, the culture you're entering, and the difference between what you want and what you're actually seeking. Your future happiness and financial security depend on getting this right.